Hi, boys and girls. Today in math, we're going to talk about frames and arrows. Frames and arrows is a type of diagram that we use in math. We use the frames and arrows in math to help us skip count some numbers. You may remember from first grade working with some problems using frames and arrows. There may have been some shapes on a page like squares or circles or rectangles or even pentagons that were blank. And maybe one or two of those had a number in it. And then there were arrows that pointed to the next frame or the next box. Well, I'm going to show you what I mean in just a minute. What do you remember about frames and arrows from first grade? Think about that for just a minute. Let me show you what I mean by frames and arrows. So what you are looking at here are frames, those are the squares, and arrows. The arrows point from one frame to the next. Frames can also be other shapes as well. They could be circles. They could be rectangles. Any shape could be a frame. So if you see a bunch of shapes like this that are in a row and there are arrows pointing from one frame to the next, those are what we call frames and arrows. The arrows stand for the rule that's in the box. So oftentimes you will see an arrow with a rule box around it. In this case, the rule is add 2. So every time I see an arrow, that means that I have to do what the rule says. I have to add 2 every time I see the arrow. I'd like to show you an example of how we use a diagram called frames and arrows. I'm going to start this diagram with the number 5 in the first frame. So in one of the frames in the first frame, I have the number 5. My rule is I must add 2 every time I see an arrow pointing to the next frame. So 5 plus 2 would be what? Yep, you got it, 7. Oh, here's another arrow. So I'm going to remember every time I see the arrow, I need to add 2 so that I can complete my frames and arrows. 7 plus 2 is 9. 9 plus 2 is 11. 11 plus 2 is 13. Let's try another one that's a little bit more complicated. This time, I have one number in my frames and arrows. Here are the arrows, and the circles are the frames. Now, I have this one clue, and my one clue is that the number that goes in this frame is the number 20. My rule is that I must add 5 every time I see the arrow, but the arrow is always going to the right. So if I start here and my arrow goes to the right, I can add 5 every time I see that rule. So I am going to remember that I have to add 5 every time I see that arrow. 20 plus 5 is 25. 25 plus 5 is 30. Now, what happens if I don't know the numbers that go in the previous 2 frames? Well, every time I see the arrow, I'm supposed to add 5. But what happens when I suddenly have to start going backwards? I have to start going this way. Well, if we have to go backwards to fill in a couple of frames, we are going to have to do the opposite or the antonym of adding 5. So what would be the opposite of adding 5? If you said subtracting 5, then you are correct. So if I have to go backwards, I have to do the opposite of whatever is in the rule box. So 20 take away 5 is 15, and 15 take away 5 is 10. Do you see how that worked out? If my arrows are going to the right, I can follow that rule pretty easily. But if there's something missing from the front and I have to go backwards to solve the problem, then I have to do the opposite of whatever is in this rule box. All right, boys and girls, here's another example of a frames and arrows problem that you may see in your math journals. Boys and girls, oh my goodness, look closely. Is there anything missing? It looks like all of my frames are already filled in with numbers. So what in the world do I have to do to this problem? It looks like someone already did it for me. Do you see anything that's missing from this problem? Look carefully. If you said that the rule was missing, you are correct. We can see the numbers in the frames and arrows, but we cannot see a rule. So guess what our job is? Our job is to look at the numbers and try and come up with a rule for the rule box. I can see that this pattern of frames and arrows is starting with the number 15, and then it goes to 12, and then 9, and then 6, and then 3. Are these numbers increasing, or are these numbers decreasing as we go along the path of the frames and arrows? If you said these numbers are decreasing, you are correct. So we're starting with a higher number and getting smaller and smaller and smaller. So my rule is going to be subtract or minus something. 15 take away what number equals 12? Did you say 15 minus 3 equals 12? That's correct. So every time I see this arrow, I'm going to subtract 3. Just to make sure, let's make sure minus 3 works with the next two frames. Is 12 take away 3 9? It sure is, so the rule works. What about this one? Is 9 take away 3 6? 9, 8, 7, 6. Yep, sure is. Is 6 take away 3 3? Yep. So my rule for the rule box is minus 3. I could also write the word subtract 3 in the box as well. All right, friends, let's look at one or two last problems today. Here I have something that's very interesting. I have several frames that are empty. I have rule boxes that are empty. What happens when I have some frames filled in, but I don't have any of the rule filled in? Guess what? They have given us 2 clues to help us solve this problem. I know that this is increasing because 25 is here and 35 is here. So as the arrows are going, as we are going down the path of the frames and arrows, the numbers are getting bigger. So I'm going to know that that's adding something. All right, so this goes from 25, skip a number, to 35. Can you guess what goes in the middle? What would make sense to go in the middle between these? It looks to me like it's counting by 5s, because here's 25 all the way to 35. That's 10. And if there's one in the middle, it must be counting by 5s. So I could go ahead and fill in my frames. This would be 30, and this would be 40. Remember what I said happens when you go backwards? because remember, I can only add 5, which would be my rule. I can only add 5 when the arrows are going this way. So if I have to go backwards, I have to subtract 5. So this would be 20, and this would be 15. Let's look at the second problem. I have 2 clues. I can tell that these numbers are getting smaller. Here's a 10, here's a 6. The arrows are pointing this way. So I know that I am going to be subtracting something. 10 all the way to 6. Well, if I subtract 4, what do I get? 10, 9, 8, 7, 6. Oh, but 6 is not in this frame, so it can't be minus 4. It's got to be something less than that. Let's try minus 2. 10 take away 2 would be 8. 8 take away 2 would be 6. This actually works out. So if 8 goes there and I subtracted 2 to get to that point, my rule is going to be subtract 2. What is 6 minus 2? 4. Do you remember what happens when we go the opposite way of our arrows? Whatever is in the rule box, you have to do the opposite of that. What would be the opposite of subtracting 2? Yep, you're right. It would be adding 2. So if I'm going backwards, I'm doing the opposite of whatever is in this box. And in this case, it's adding 2. So 10 plus 2, remember I'm going the other way, would be 12. And 12 plus 2 would be 14. So if we have a couple of clues, we can actually figure out what goes in the frames and what goes in the rule box. Today, you get to practice working on some frames and arrows yourself. You're going to open up your math journal to page 42. There are several frames and arrows problems that I would like for you to practice today. Make sure that you complete all of your assignments and have a wonderful day. Bye-bye.